happy. I start thinking about that happy song, and I'm just like, I'll never be that happy in my life. Like, I'm like, okay. No. This year for in February, John wanted me to talk about why we laugh. And I started doing the research, and I started thinking about the psychological and physical ramifications, and that's all well and good, but I think I'm going to start on a bit of a personal note. As the old folks say, see, my background is in the Baptist church, so this ain't going to be my testimony. And it is not necessarily why, it's why I decided to make people laugh. For some of you don't know, I'm a stand-up comic. I'm a professional stand-up comic, and so my story into going into stand-up comedy is an interesting one. She's laughing because she knows the story. Okay, let's see. I guess the story starts about 5 years ago. I was attending Open Heart on a somewhat regular basis, but not really. And I was dating a woman at the time. And I should have known the relationship wasn't going to go well because I brought her here and she didn't like it. So I was like, how can you not like coming here? This is amazing. And so we were living together, shacking up, as the old folks say. And I was working at a hotel down the street that is particularly racist, Peabody. It's racist. They have a section in the Peabody called the Plantation Rooftop. Nobody seems to care. They're just like, plantation. Like, there are all these old pictures of like all these happy, pristine white faces, and like in the corner there's a blur because this black person that shined their shoes right before they took the picture. Anyway. So this particular day at the Peabody, somebody jumped off the roof and committed suicide. And I called my girlfriend at the time and told her what was going on. And like I said, we were living together, and I got home before she did. She got home, and she has a serious look on her face, and I'm thinking she's coming to console me because I just found a dead body. But no, she says, oh, well, I don't think things are working out. And I'm just like, really? Of all days to do this, today is the day that you choose to do it. And so there was that. And then about 3 weeks later, because of budget cuts, I lost my job at the Peabody. It's funny how finding a dead body tends to make productivity go way back. And so I was just in this funk. I was in this state. I didn't leave the couch. A nice groove in my couch. It was very nice. I would essentially just live on my couch, and comedy is something I always wanted to try. And I'd done it a couple of times, and it was okay. And finally, I was like, well, this is the bottom. I've got nothing left to lose. So I went and started doing stand-up, and started doing it more, and started doing it more. And then the next thing I knew, I was getting invited to contests and festivals and things of that nature. And that's kind of how it got started. And when I think back to that time, I've since adopted a quote from Rain Pryor, who is the daughter of the late great Richard Pryor. And she says, the quote is, "Comedy is knowing that my pain is hysterical." And so that's just kind of what you have to do. You have to find ways to kind of laugh through the pain. It's just because at some point you run out of tears, and you run out of like everybody's been saying, happiness is a choice, and that's what I try to do. I try to find something to laugh at every single day. I suggest everybody else do the same. If you need something, here's one. Racism. Racism is hilarious to me. Like when I see somebody like funny racism, that's fine. But like mean racism, whenever I see somebody that's like mean and racist, I feel the same way about them that I feel about like a payphone. I'm like, first of all, I can't believe you still exist. And two, I really don't want to touch you. But everybody should seriously try to find a reason to say, if not laugh, not outright laugh, smile every single day. Because if you're not laughing, you're not living.
Right.
And so it is.
Do you realize that?
Yes.
Realize that. I mean, because what I mean by that is when I got up and when I started driving here and it was raining, I said, oh boy, I'm not going to see. I'm not going to see many people today.
Oh, how we faith.
Exactly. And that's why I say you all are amazing, despite the fact, because a lot of times people will use the rain as an excuse not to be someplace, particularly a lot of times on Sundays and those kinds of things. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Richard, for starting us out in a great way. It's always, you get nervous when you got to stay with the meeting, because you don't know where they're going to go. But I thank Richard for that. And Philip, that song, my wife Em and I like to do karaoke. And that's a song I sing a lot of times when we go out and do karaoke. It's really kind of fun, but I will tell you that. But indeed, it's a new month. We're in the month of February, and it seems like Things are already starting to pick up and move. But the month of February, and as I was talking with someone a couple of weeks ago, they said, well, you know, February is the month of love. And I said, well, yeah, a lot of times because of Valentine's Day being a part of it. And so as I started thinking about this month and thinking about the idea of love and how important and how pervasive love is for us as expressions of God. And so I started thinking about that and started thinking about the idea of love and loving unconditionally and talking about that for the month and love itself. And Ernest Holmes says that, you know, love is the fire of the universe, nay, the very spark. And the master teacher Jesus, in one of the stories in the scripture, was asked what the greatest commandment was. And his response was to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and all of your mind, and all of your soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And he goes on and says that on these two hang all of the law and the prophets. And as Walter Starkey points out, what Jesus was really doing when he described this as being the greatest commandment, he actually tied the two together. He basically was taking the idea of duality and bringing it in. So rather than us having God that we love, and then, you know, we maybe sometimes love our neighbors, you know, when they act right, when they do right, when they do the way we want them to. He was taking that duality and moving it from the subjective and the objective and pulling it together so that ultimately love is one. And love, I say, love is an act. It's not a noun, and it's important that we remember that because we make love a noun so often, and as a noun, we throw it around, we toss it around, we take it, we give it, we take it back, we do all of those things, but loving is an action. Just as God is a verb, God is an action. God is not love, God is loving. And when we really begin to understand what all of this means, we begin to understand that loving is the way that we are because God is loving us. The universe is loving us. Source is loving us. And then we in turn, because we are not separate from God, we also allow ourselves to be loving and express this love to one another. Now, and it's important for me to clarify and say that first off, that I'm not judging, but I have a neighbor that reminded me about the whole idea of what it meant to be loving and to use love as an object or rather than using love as an action. And so as I looked at that, it was a neighbor that had a sign, ironically, in his yard. Well, he finally moved to the porch. That was one of those signs that was a part of a campaign that they have around the city that said, God so loved. And, you know, I would see that every day as I would drive home and drive past his house. But it occurred to me one day that while it was a good idea, it was just simply a slogan. It was just simply something that was not necessarily something that he had embodied or expressed. And the way I said it is because every few days, and I finally figured it out, it was because of drinking, he would pull up in the driveway of his house and stand out in the yard and proceed to cuss his wife out. Enough for the neighbors to hear. Simply, I'm telling the truth. And every few days, hear the horn blow, and he's standing in the yard again, accusing her of all kinds of things, calling her all kinds of things in front of the children, and all of that. And that sign is sitting there saying, God so loved. And then, unfortunately, they got put out of their home, and they left 2 dogs behind. And this was right at the time when the temperature dropped below freezing, and there you had 2 dogs there that had to try to fend for themselves. And so we and some of the other neighbors did what we could and, made the calls that needed to be made and all of that. But then looking at that and the idea that, number one, that love is something that's to be expressed at all times. But it made me begin to search in my own life, not in a way of judging him, but how am I not always expressing love? Am I expressing love only for the people that I like? Am I expressing love only toward people when they act right? Because a part of this whole idea of unconditional love, and we'll talk more later in the month about romantic love and the idea of romantic love, but ultimately, just as we said this morning, that being happy was a choice, loving is a choice. Because we have the power to give it, and we also have the power to withhold it. Now, one of the things that's important for us to recognize and realize that there can be consequences when we withhold love. And so I was searching in myself and wondering, rather than looking at him and saying, how awful it is that he stands out in the yard and, cusses his wife and family out, and how awful it is that they leave the dogs behind when they, move out and all of that, and it's freezing weather and they don't have any food, all of that. How and where in my own life am I not loving? And I think that's important, that rather than getting caught up in pointing at other people, it's about examining ourselves, and it's about recognizing first and foremost, and when we look at this scripture, and when we look at the direction that we're being pointed in, it first off talks about loving God with all that we have, with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, and with all of our strength. And that ultimately, I think, means that when we recognize and realize that God is expressing love in and through us each and every day, we can begin turning back and returning that love. And so how does God express his love each and every day? What are you doing right now? You're breathing. You're here. You're present on this plane. The very fact that you are here is an expression of that loving God. And the thing of it is, that's really important to understand, is not something that we had to earn. It's not something that we had to try to go out and get or go out and be. It just simply is. It's an opportunity for us to recognize and realize that right here, the very act of existing, the very act of being is proof positive of a loving God that is loving us, that is expressing his love as us. That's why it's so important for me that when we come here to Open Heart, that you hear how wonderful and how amazing you are. I just stand up and say, good morning, sinners. How awful you are. I said, you are amazing. Because that's who you are. You are amazing expressions of God. And the thing of it is that when we recognize and realize that, when we get a hold of that, when we allow that to be the truth of who we are, we begin to feel that love. We begin to know what it means like to be loved. We begin to understand how it is that God is expressing as us uniquely and individually. And then we see that. And because, again, we get caught up in I had a demonstration in mind, but we get caught up in the whole thing about, the difference between the verb and the noun. What is this? Paper. Piece of paper. Piece of paper. Got a teacher over here is noun, right? What is it now?
Fan.
Paper.
Fan. The action is one of the fanning, the same thing, but now it's converted into an action. And as we feel the love that is expressing to us and through us, then we turn and we express that love to one another. We express that love to those people who present themselves to be challenges for us to love, even those racists, Richard. It's difficult. But the thing of it is that we can be loving, we can know what it is to share that love, to express that love, because we never know. I remember hearing Joseph Lowery, one of the civil rights pioneers, Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowery, who was president of the SCLC for a very long time, talk about an experience of a young man who was standing inside of a shelter waiting on the train. And it was back in the days of segregation, and the laws were at that time that if a white person came in, that he had to go out, and it was raining very terribly. And so the black man went outside of the shelter because of that. The white man and his son came in, and the rain was pouring down. And after a couple of minutes of looking out at that, he said, "Come on in." And then he turned and he looked at him and he said, "It wasn't good for me for you to be out there. It wasn't good for me for you to be out there." The thing of it is that when we begin to understand and to experience the expression of love in us, then we start to evaluate other people in a different light. And we understand that to hate someone, to withhold love from someone, to be judgmental about someone, ultimately isn't good for us. And when we can get to that point, we can begin loving. We can begin to understand what it means to love God with all of our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. To love our neighbor as ourselves. As we move through this month, we'll unpack it. We'll dig into it. We'll dig deep. We'll get down and see what all this love thing is all about. It's so